water, cleaning our water bodies, greening our campus. We can take smart action for the conservative initiatives, for sustainable activities, and at the same time, we can raise the awareness of the community through various programs by holding discussion with them, by dissemination of knowledge through print and electronic media, through organizing the essay competition, poster competition, drawing competition, etc. And we at NIDE Bhopal, we are also committed to such initiatives, and we always look opportunities wherever we can contribute in conservation of environment, be it from building the campus on the green building norm, be it banning smoking and single-use plastic in the campus, be it the plantation drive for each day we celebrate in a year, be it the use of solar energy as a source of energy, and again in future we are planning that use of electric vehicles and vermicomposting in the campus. So we are committed, not only that because it is our mandate, but also we want to lead by example. When before preaching others, we should also set example. So with that initiative, we take all these steps. And again, I am happy to announce here that to raise community awareness about the environment, environmental health, and ecosystem restoration, we will soon be launching a program, online program, 4 weeks online program on community-based participatory research and environmental health, along with our partner participatory research in Asia, New Delhi. The detail about that program will be told by Tanvi in the later part of the program. Thus, again reiterating that ecosystem conservation or ecosystem restoration is a need of an hour, I once again welcome all and thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for beautifully showcasing our institution and the work going on here. Thank you very much. Professor Balram Bhargav, the current Director General of ICMR and the Secretary to Government of India, Department of Health Research, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, hardly needs any introduction. He has been at the forefront of COVID pandemic management in India and has been efficiently guiding the scientists of ICMR, one of the oldest medical research bodies in the world. It is our immense pleasure to have him join us today. I request you, sir, to kindly address the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. The Honorable Director of the ICMR National Institute of Research in Environment Health, Dr. Tiwari, the beautiful green building of the institution, which has recently been inaugurated by the Honorable Health Minister, I think is one of the landmarks of the Indian Council of Medical Research. Professor C.K. Varshney, Professor Emeritus at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Karthik Shankar from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, Dr. Vishal Diwan, who will be proposing the vote of thanks, other luminaries and dignitaries and the directors of various institutes and scientists. It's my pleasure to be here for this mini symposium on the World Environment Day. Now, I have a very few points to make, but I want to make them nice and strong, that because today we are in the midst of a pandemic. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the question arises, why did we have this pandemic? In this new millennium, that is in the 20 years that have gone by in this millennium, we have witnessed SARS, we have witnessed MERS, we have witnessed Nipah, we have witnessed Zika, we have witnessed Ebola, as well as this COVID-19. And the reason why we are seeing these pandemics more repeatedly in this millennium or in this century is because of our change in environment, change in ecology, number one. Number two, extreme connectivity. there is tremendous amount of connectivity, physical connectivity, which has happened. The earth has shrunk and people are traveling too much. There is a rapid, very rapid urbanization occurring in many parts of the world, as well as the public health spending has been less. So we have these four major reasons of the change in environment, change in ecology, rapid urbanization, extreme connectivity, contributing with poor spending on public health as far as India is concerned, and also less spending in health in India, just less than 2% compared to really up to 20% of the GDP in the United States. So those are issues which have been neglected. And I think this pandemic is a wake-up call for us to really prevent these diseases, particularly these viral diseases, by preserving our environment. We have had the depletion of the ozone layer, pollution, toxic chemicals, desertification, and global warming, which have contributed immensely to the change in ecology, the change in environment, and responsible for various diseases that we are seeing today. Now, today, the World Environment Day is being celebrated by the, which was declared as the World Environment Day in 1974, nearly about 50 years back. And we celebrate this day and we try to have some seminars, essays, planting trees, etc., and discussions. Having said that, we need to take a follow-up action till the next Environment Day, such that we are contributing not only at the individual level, at the institutional level, at the organizational level, at the ministry level, at the national level, and also at the international level to protect our environment. We have witnessed a lot of climate crises with floods, cyclones, storms, droughts, and global warming with environmental degradation. And we realize that we have 80% of our water bodies are polluted. Air pollution remains a major problem, one of the top 4 killers in the world after malnutrition, hypertension, cancer, and then air pollution. So air pollution remains another huge big problem that not only our country, but the entire world is facing. So there is a need for urgent action. There is a need for a pledge. And I would request the director that there should be some sort of a pledge which we could initiate from the ICMR, ICMR NIRE, that a pledge be taken by all institutions of ICMR that we will plant a tree, we will keep our campus clean, it will be stray dog free stray dog free zones, it will be plastic free, single-use plastic will not be used. So if this kind of a pledge can be drafted by the director there, and we could then propagate it to all the institutes, that's a very small action, but we can start with that. The other point is that we have to have the community engagement, and for which the ICMR has always been worked with the community, whether it be for COVID, whether it be for vaccination, whether it be for malaria, filaria, leprosy, tuberculosis. Now, ICMR is known for working with the community, and I think that needs to be leveraged in a big way so that we are able to save our environment. And in the last thing that I want to say, last few things, is that we need to plant trees at the individual level. We need to know that the 5 elements, which is Chiti, Jal, Pawa, Gagan, Samira, we have to save them. And that has been there in our Upanishads for more than a few thousand years, that Chiti, Jal, Pawa, Gagan, Samira are the 5 elements which have to be saved. And more importantly, we have to, after this pandemic, what we have really learned is to work on the Gandhian philosophy of less is more and minimalism. So I would last say one sentence, that minimalism is dead, but long live minimalism. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your insightful words. Our next speaker, Professor C.K. Varshney, is a stalwart in the field of environmental science, who has authored many books and research papers published in leading national and international journals, and is a recipient of multiple prestigious awards. He is former dean and professor emeritus at School of Environmental Sciences, JNU, where he was the founder faculty of India's first environmental science school. He has taught and mentored several students over the years at multiple institutions, both in India and abroad. He was the academic director of Lead India program, an initiative of Rockefeller Foundation, member of the governing body of Wetland International South Asia, and has worked as senior fellow at East West Center, Honolulu, Hawaii. Professor Varshney was the founder secretary of the National Committee on Environmental Planning and Coordination, NCEPC, which was the apex policy and planning body in the government for all environmental matters prior to the formation of the Ministry of Environment. He was also member secretary of the Indian delegation to the historic UN Conference on Human Environment at Stockholm, founder secretary of the National Committee for UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Program. He was member of Indian delegation to first and second UNEP Governing Council meetings at Geneva and Nairobi respectively, and leader of Indian delegation to Conference of Parties Ramsar Convention. Sir has also contributed his immense scientific expertise to various environmental research and policy planning committees in India. We are immensely happy to have him join us today. Sir, I kindly request you to deliver your talk.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank and congratulate ICMR Bhopal Research Institute for organizing this event, the World Environment Day. And I'm grateful to Dr. Tiwari for inviting me to this meeting and to really participate in this very important event. Professor Bhargav has already given a very nice message that we have to practice parsimony of nature because the resources are precious. And I'm thankful also to Dr. Dhawan for really doing a lot of background work in putting this lecture together and permitting me to really share some views about this year's topic of World Environment Day. It must be quite interesting to ask that while we are suffering very intensely and very painfully from the COVID-19 problem, which itself is very engaging as well as inflicting enormous pain world over in every community. And it is at this moment, which is so critical, we have started talking about ecosystem. The question is that what is this relationship and why we are talking about it at this time? Is it relevant? Is it reasonable to devote our energy and resources to this issue? The term ecosystem is relatively new. It was only introduced in 1935, but it has gained a very speedy currency into the lexicon of developmental and sustainable development dialogues and policy discussions. I think no statesman of the world is there who is not using and describing and talking about ecosystems. So what I try to do today is first that since it is an ecosystem which have to be taken care of, so what are these ecosystems and why we should really try to conserve them and protect them. So first, ecosystem is an ecological system. The two terms have been rammed together and we get an ecosystem. It's a unit of nature. It's a system. And as we know in physics, that any system is a part of a larger system and consists of many smaller systems. Your body is a system in which you have got a digestive system, a urinary system, and many other systems. And all put together, we get an individual which has enormous capacities and functions to discharge and perform. So the sum of all systems is much larger when they are integrated and when the system starts operating and working. Similarly, the ecosystem consists of various parts which are broadly classified into biotic and abiotic. The biotic components are represented by plants, animals, microorganisms, viruses. An abiotic system consists of radiation environment that we receive from an extraterrestrial source as an input. Climate, which means rainfall, seasons, humidity, wind, shade, light, and so on. Now, all these components are so integrated that they really provide the conditions as well as the processes which help us to really provide a large number of services. There are various types of ecosystems, natural as well as human impacted ecosystems. Natural ecosystems are again, they may be terrestrial, aquatic, such as forest, grassland, and desert, and aquatic ecosystems such as wetland, river, estuaries, and ocean. Human impacted systems include modified ecosystems such as silvicultural systems, plantations for rubber, tea, and so on. Then agricultural systems or agro-ecosystems, fruit orchards, and so on, as well as aquatic ponds, aquaculture ponds, and then man-made ecosystems like cities, which are artificial and which have very little, I should say, self-controlling mechanism. Most of the natural ecosystem are perpetuate themselves. If they are left to themselves undisturbed, they keep on renewing themselves and remain in a very, I should say, healthy state. So they are permanent assets. And all ecosystems put together form the biosphere, the thin shell of life, which really is responsible for zipping the other three spheres, such as atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere. It is the biosphere which really zips them and which allows them to operate the way they are operating today. The next slide. The working of an ecosystem is very important. All ecosystems have structure as well as function. And you see that in your own body, all cells have the same DNA, but since the structure is different and therefore they perform different function. So structure and function go together. So all ecosystems possess a structure, and it is this structure that allows them to really manifest various functions. And there are two important functions that they do. In fact, there are many, but they can be classified, bundled into two categories. Number one, flow of energy, and second, cycling of matter. The flow of energy is unidirectional, downhill, while cycling of the matter is cyclical, and it really continues. All ecosystems have open boundaries. They communicate with the neighboring systems all the time and continuously. And then these ecosystems also show evolutionary change. They are highly dynamic, extremely sensitive to perturbation, and they are not static. They always remain and establish an equilibrium which allows them to manifest these functions to their maximum. That is, they optimize these functions and are adjusting according to the changing climate. Climate is always changing, though very slowly, but it has changed. And we have evidence from fossil fuel, fossils records, and many other that climates have changed. And then there is a succession, that how actually ecosystem arise. Now, I will not like to go into too many details of this, but the next slide will show you where I have tried to put that these functions, next slide, if we have, provide us a lot of ecosystem services. Yeah, let us understand also for a moment the energy flow. Sun provides the electromagnetic radiation in which we have got a small window, which is a visible window, which is also strikes the green plants, which are only capable. Green plants include all, which means from microorganisms or small algae, phytoplankton, to large trees such as sequoia and so on. They are capable of harvesting solar energy in a very subtle and very easy way, using very common resources of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water, and transform them through the magic that they have into carbohydrates, and from them a variety of other products. They form a large amount of biomass, which are used by heterotrophs, including human beings, decomposers, detritivores, and so on. And while all this is happening, a lot of energy which they have harvested from the sun is really lost to the environment. And this waste heat, finally, it discharges into the atmosphere. The consumers do their activity, and then the heat is really given out, because transformation of heat or transformation of energy one type to the other is never 100%. It is followed strictly by second law of thermodynamics, and thus there is a waste heat which generates after each conversion of the energy from one form to other. The dead animals and dead plants are decomposed, and the decomposers are microorganisms and fungi and many other organisms such as earthworm and so on. They all really help. So there is a big brigade which really work on this organic matter, which also have inherent energy in it, because once you burn, you can find that there is a lot of energy which gets released, and the waste heat is again given out. So in fact, in a balanced ecosystem, in a natural ecosystem, the amount of energy that is captured gets processed by all these various organisms which are interlinked together in a very intimate way, including human beings, which really help in the flow of energy. So a high quality energy is produced, a low quality energy is received from the sun, plants convert into more concentrated energy, which is consumed by other organisms. And finally, all this energy gets dissipated. And in doing so, the organism performs the function and so on and so forth. All that is produced is known as primary production. And all the body weight and biomass generated by the heterotrophs or the consumers is known as secondary production. Primary production is divided or can be seen into two forms: gross production, which means that total amount of energy harvested. A part of it is used by plants themselves for their own metabolism and for all their activities, including flowering, fruiting, and so on, and growth. So what net amount of energy they are able to accommodate manifests itself into the biomass that they produce, and it is known as net primary production. And it is this net primary production or the energy inherent in the net primary production is available to the consumers and so on. So you can see that our dependence on these products and plant products is absolute. And without that, it is impossible to visualize any living organism in this system. So I think this system is a very, very vitally important system for us. Next slide can have, yes. This is all the interrelationship that we have. And I think that all of you know that there are food chains, and there are two different kinds of food chains, detritus food chain. And all these food chains are actually meshed together and provide food web, which has got a kind of highway and byway for energy as well as for nutrient. Each body has about 3 to 4 milligram of iron, and also about 1,200 grams of calcium. And I'm not sure whether any one of us have ever chewed a piece of iron to really get, for our red blood cells, the hemoglobin, which is red color, is because of the iron compound. So I think, and which undergoes repeated oxidation and reduction, which is the basis of respiration that we do. But it is all through the food chain that is delivered to us in quantities and doses which we can accumulate. And therefore, finally, we accumulate all this. So we can say that ecosystem is a giant bank through which every individual freely and at will, at rates suitable to them, can withdraw these major essential nutrients. And this bank never maintains any account like any other bank. There is no account that is maintained. And everybody who really desires any amount is given liberally, without any question and without any worry of NPAs. Because on death, all organisms compulsorily return all this back to the system. And thus the materials keeps on flowing and the energy keeps on, the materials keeps on cycling and energy keeps on flowing. And it is the flow of energy which allows the cycles to move. And I think all organisms do their work absolutely dedicatedly, because each one is really sourcing energy from the work that they are doing. And therefore, there is no compulsion, there is no diktat to really have attendance. Every organism works absolutely with great dedication because it is their own interest. Next. I'm just trying to say, and then, next slide, please. Now, these nutrient cycles that we see in the biosphere, about which the mention was made that there are now floods that we get, cyclones that we get, are all modulated in very significant way. In fact, the climate is really an output or function of the biological and the biodiversity or the ecosystem activities that we have. Trees release huge amount of water in evapotranspiration, which ultimately provides the occasions for the clouds and so on. And carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, they all cycle. And they all cycle, but there is also another cycle that takes place, and that is known as biomagnification. Because from the small quantity, the larger quantities keep on depositing as the food chain moves up. And I think in this case, we can see that the DDT, which may be so small as 0.0003 ppm or even less in the water, ultimately in the top predator or in the kite or in the owl and so on, becomes highly concentrated, maybe 3,600 times or more. So I think here is also a process by which we accumulate our calcium in our body and so on and so forth. So biomagnification also takes place, which is a reverse process of the nutrient cycling and so on. Next. All these activities provide a large number of ecosystem services to the humanity. And now we try to really chart as to how ecosystems are relevant to us and how we are dependent on ecosystems. And therefore, we are talking about ecosystems. First of all, provisioning service. A large variety of provisioning services we make use of, such as food, clean water, timber, fiber, genetic resources, and so on. Regulating services, such as climate, flood, disease, water quality, and pollination. Because it is the pollinating agents, such as bees, birds, which are responsible for giving us our agricultural produce. Over 60 to 70% of the agricultural plants require an external pollinating agent. Without that, it is impossible to enjoy your mango or your apple. It is their hard work which really finally helps to fruitify in form of the fruits that we enjoy. Supporting services such as soil formation, because without soil, nothing grows. And there is no factory of the soil, neither in the past, nor now, nor it's going to be ever in the future. So soil is precious. Soil is precious and living. And it is here that actually most of the nutrient cycling processing takes place. Then also it provides cultural services, such as recreation, aesthetic, as well as spiritual benefit. And you see that a lot of, I should say, poetry and a lot of interesting literature is created because people get that kind of excitement as well as that kind of encouragement when they interact with the nature which is intact. Next. Now, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment for the first time took place in the year 2000 with the support and assistance of, and with the support of United Nations. This was the first assessment to see that what is the state of ecosystems in the world on which the mankind so much depends for food, as well as for pleasure, as well as for all the luxuries that we enjoy. And the findings and the message was very, very disturbing. It's a voluminous report which is available on the net, but I have culled out few salient features of this, which provides the central message. Over the past 50 years, humans have changed ecosystem more rapidly than any time in the past for growing demands of food, fresh water, timber, fiber, fuel, and many other luxuries. The changes have provided a lot of leisure and comfort to human, but at a tremendous cost, which we are experiencing in terms of highly depauperating ecosystem services, which are so critical to us. Degradation of ecosystem services they provide is alarming. And in coming years, it is going to be even more. But on the other hand, in the future, our dependence on these ecosystem services is going to increase manifold because of the population and because of our multiplying demands that we are having. This would require significant change in policies if we have to really ensure that in future we get these services and our ecosystems become strong to support us, and not only to us, but to the future generations to come. Then I think significant changes are required. Institutions have to be changed in a very significant way. Perhaps new institutions have to be designed, and practice across sectors and geographies have to change. Not at the individual space, but at a very, very fast pace. Unless this happens, the future of mankind is in peril. Next. Now, this is a graph which is a very popular one and which shows that, and this is the entire Earth with respect to the one aspect. And it only shows that how sensitive the ecosystem, the biosphere is. And here you will find that there is a graph and there is a zigzag line like a saw, which you can see. And this is a measurement of carbon dioxide at Mauna Loa Island in Hawaii, where this measurement was started for the first time in 1960, and they are continuously taking place today. Pre-industrial level carbon dioxide was 280 parts per million in the atmosphere, and today, that is on 4th, till yesterday, 4th of June, what I checked was that the carbon dioxide concentration has increased to 420 parts per million. So you can see that what a tremendous amount of increase in carbon dioxide. It is one inorganic factor that we had changed because of the human activity of burning the fossil fuels unchecked and only for pleasure and for enjoyment on a very large scale. 3 cars, 4 cars, cross-country races, and whatnot. And what you see that these lines represent a continuous rise in the carbon dioxide is clear, but these wavy lines shows that during winter, carbon dioxide increases and during summer it is pulled out. So we can say that it is a kind of electrocardiogram of the Earth as a whole with respect to carbon dioxide, which we are seeing today. And this only shows that system is very large, but it is very sensitive. And also it has got limits. It is not unlimited. All this tries to really say and emphasize, without my saying, it should be clear that we are part of the ecosystem. Not only we are part of the ecosystem, we are product of the ecosystem. So if the ecosystems are unwell and if they are degraded, the question is that there is no way that health and well-being of the human beings can be assured. Our health and our well-being is going to be, or is a reflection of the ecosystem health. And that is the reason that you will find that in this world, there is all kinds of problem that we are facing. Either the forests are burning unchecked, or there are floods, or there are cyclones, and or there are locust episodes. So I think one after another, we encounter a new problem with a greater and greater dimension and attention. And this is all nothing but a symptomatic of the diseased as well as damaged ecosystems that have been created by us, by our own activity. If I have to give some kind of a broad simile, it is like this, that you have a large pot of drinking water from which you are withdrawing your drinking water. And at the same time, you are using the same pot for discharging your waste. Since the pot is very large, so you cannot see it. A person sitting on the other end, or let us say a lake, and if you start discharging on the other end, then I think nobody can see. In fact, you yourself will not see sometimes after later. So I think it is some kind of a very, very unhappy situation because of our ignorance of our place in the ecosystem. Sometimes we say that nature and man, I think the two cannot be equated. We are part of the nature. We are not a part, we are part of the nature. So I think that must be understood. The next slide will. Ecosystem and health are very closely related. And I think Dr. Bhargava has alluded to this briefly. And I can only say that land use changes in a global significant driver of pandemics, causing emergence of more than 30% of new diseases since 1960. And if this continues, many more new diseases are going to come. Because of the land use changes, our interaction and our transmission and our trajectory of interacting with the wild animal has increased, which are carriers of these various viruses. Deforestation, encouragement of human and livestock into biodiversity habitat provide new pathways for pathogens to spill over and increase the transmission rate as well as the predicament for the mankind. Next. And it is under this compelling conditions and situation that United Nations Environment Program, UNEP as we call it, which is a product of the 1972 Stockholm Conference, that this year they have chosen ecosystem restoration as the theme for the World Environment Day. Actually, it is not the theme for the World Environment Day, but it is a theme for next 10 years. United Nations is going to really emphasize and generate programs for 10 years for ecosystem restoration. So it is a decade of ecosystem restoration, which marks its beginning from today. And it ends by 2030, which also ends the ecosystem sustainable development goal achievement. So I think next 10 years, this activity is going to continue. And I think what Dr. Bhargava was saying, that let us take a pledge. You can take a pledge for any activity, but after taking pledge, people forget. So my task is, or our task should be, that to take people and to really tell them that how it is going to benefit them. And unless we really try to establish this clearly and convincingly, people will not stick to the pledge. We have seen it, and we have seen it in the past. People take pledge and easily they forget. So I think it is not the day that we are celebrating. It is the decade that we are going to celebrate. And it is the beginning of it, or it is the inauguration of that, which also happens to be the theme for this June 5th World Environment Day. The next slide. How do we restore? That is an important issue. It is very easy to say restore ecosystem. And I think an individual with two hands, what is it that he can do? Can he do? Even if I take a pledge, I'm really at a loss that what I can do. So I think there are certain principles of restoration. And these principles I have tried to really put together. Identify the cause of degradation. Stop abuse by reducing factors. Reintroduce species if necessary. Protect area from further degradation. This we can do by really approaching the local authorities. In fact, it's not a question of authorities. It is through the length and breadth and entire fabric of the government that everybody must be given and this understanding as to what they are supposed to do. Every decision must be guided and must have a bearing for protecting the ecosystem. Protecting the ecosystem is protecting economy. Ecosystem and ecology is nothing but economy. If you have healthy resources, if the soil is able to produce without fertilizer and without agrochemicals and cosmetics, I think you are gaining a lot. You are saving enormous amount of foreign exchange by not importing synthetic fertilizer and at the same time polluting your waterways and rivers, which again, we take as a major task. So all these things can be in one go taken care of, provided we really maintain ecosystem. And also we will be able to prevent and control many viral diseases and other diseases which are going to emerge should this continue the way it is going. It is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem with understanding and with ecological laws that has been degraded, damaged, and destroyed. It is an international activity that initiates or accelerates an ecological pathway or a trajectory through time towards a reference state. So I think when we are talking of restoration, it is important that we should have a reference point. And reference point has to be taken from the past, what it was. And that is again a very technical question. So merely plantation of trees may not be a solution as we always try to prescribe. Because growing trees anywhere and everywhere is not what the nature design is. There are certain areas where trees could really be very helpful, but there are other areas where trees could create a serious problem as well. And we have large number of such cases available. Growing eucalyptus through sanction by the policy of the government, of the then government, has created enormous amount of damage to our ecosystems. So I think one has to be very careful and choosy in order to really find out as to what is to be grown, how is to be grown, what needs to be done. So I think it's a technical activity which needs to be done. Next. Now, before I really conclude, I would like to say that what individual can do, which is a question that I raised. I think you can contribute a great deal in your day-to-day activity. As a amount of protein intake from animal sources, then I think you are taxing the ecosystem. And we can reduce. And if individuals keep on reducing and switching on to more vegetarian diet, then I think they are really saving the erosion and the destruction of ecosystem in a significant way. Secondly, use electricity only as much as you can. Don't waste food. Take in plate which you can eat. No extra food, either at home or at any feast that you really go and attend. And this is going to have a very serious healing effect on our ecosystem. All this comes from the ecosystem, the water and the amount of water that you need for growing food. And you can see that what amount of kashmakash takes place between Delhi and Punjab and Haryana for water resources, between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So all that will come down. A large number of dams will not be required, and natural vegetation will not be destroyed, and the wildlife will not be destroyed. Because once a large amount of, or a dam is created, huge water bodies are created, and the animals move helter and skelter and creates another, I should say, a problem where interaction with the human beings increases. and the chances of viruses jumping from these animals to the human being also increases. So I think the industrial processes which are being used in agriculture, danger of salmonella. So if these are going to come to us. Recently, the news has come from China again that there is because of the birds have really created a kind of a virus has jumped into, and then some people are suffering from a unknown disease. And as a result, 7 million birds were destroyed. Short while ago, Netherlands has culled out a large number of minks. So I think there are also reports that the virus has jumped to the tiger and sometimes to the cat, and from the cat back to the human being. So I wish is also very, very threatening to the human race. And thus, I want to conclude and thank you again for your patient hearing. And my task was to really relate as to how we are related to ecosystem and how their welfare is nothing that we are doing any service to them, but actually we are trying to foretell and satisfy and really safeguard ourselves from the incumbent dangers should the ecosystem continue to degrade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for such an interesting talk. I immensely enjoyed your speech, and I'm sure all our audience members also enjoyed it. Now it's time to move on to our next speaker. Professor Karthik Sankar is a biologist par excellence who is renowned for his passionate efforts in the field of both ecosystem research as well as field level conservation activities. As faculty at the Center of Ecological Sciences, Indian Institute of Science, he works on the ecology and evolution of various marine and terrestrial flora and fauna found in India, and has been involved in several research projects resulting in publications in reputed national and international journals. In the 25 years of his career, which he jokingly attributes to an ancient reptile, a sea turtle that crawled ashore late one night in Madras decades ago, he has conducted research on and has guided student groups in multiple conservation activities for sea turtles in Chennai, olive red lace in Odisha, and leatherback turtles in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. He has served as the president of the International Sea Turtle Society and regional vice chairperson of the IUCN SSC Marine Turtle Specialist Group. He is also the founding trustee of Dakshin Foundation, which works largely with coastal communities on natural resource conservation and management. He is also the founding editor of the magazine Current Conservation. He is the author of the book From Soup to Superstar, a historical account of sea turtle conservation in India. He has also written several children's stories, including Turtle Story, The Adventures of Pilotus Frog, etc., to inspire children regarding the need for ecosystem restoration. Sir, we are immensely happy to have you join us today. I request you to kindly deliver your talk.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. Let me share my screen and get the PowerPoint going. Can you see the?
Yes, sir, your slide is visible.
Great. Let me start again by thanking the Institute for this invitation. In particular, Dr. Tiwari, thank you for inviting me to give this talk. Dr. Bhargava, it was very inspiring to hear your words this morning, and Dr. Devan again for organizing this. I think Professor Varshni has set up my talk very nicely. I think there's many of the things that I'm going to talk about today are going to build on the foundation that he provided. Right. Uh, so as an ecologist, I study diversity, and the kinds of things that interest me and my colleagues and my students and the world of ecologists around me are things like global patterns of diversity, such as you can see here, a global amphibian richness, a group that I'm work on closely, global plant richness, fish richness, and so on. And this sort of results in this pattern of diversity in the world, which has fascinated naturalists for close to 200 years. From the time of Darwin and even before, I mean, even Linnaeus talked about the higher diversity of the torrid zones of the world, right? And so at one hand, for several hundred years now, we've known about, we've thought about the patterns of diversity, and we've, wondered about its significance to us, right? Now, however, when we talk about diversity, I want to point out that, there's so many different levels that one can think about diversity, from, genes to species to ecosystems to, as Professor Vashni pointed out, to the services that these ecosystems provide, both in terms of supporting life and health and regulating services and so on, but also in terms of their value to us as human beings. Now, having said all of that, at the same time today we hear about this world of threats that biodiversity faces, right? This climate change, this habitat degradation due to agriculture, timber extraction, urbanization. There's of course massive levels of pollution, commercial extraction, disease that has sort of come to the fore because of the COVID pandemic today. Very rightly pointed out, we perhaps still don't know what the origins of the disease are, but the spread of it was no doubt created by the connectivity that we've created around the world today. As Professor Bhargava aptly said, the world has shrunk, and our ability to pass both good things and bad things onto each other has dramatically increased. But at the same time, when we deal with environmental threats, there is also poverty, marginalization, massive issues relating to governance, livelihoods, human health, sanitation, education, and so on, right? Now, we're dealing with this combination of challenges. And some of this is sort of brought to the fore. I in fact want to sort of like flag that I made this slide maybe 5 years ago, pointing out that we have 35 million flights a year. Now, this more than anything else, this perhaps is it can be attributed to a pandemic. A disease could have any source, but when we have the world connected in this manner, we make it and we kind of ease their pathway to conquering the world. If you look at these sort of like global figures, the amount of solid waste we generate, the amount of land purchased for food security, the number of new private cars there are in each of these countries, but also the inequity in terms of 5% of the global population using a quarter of the world's fossil fuel resources. This sort of creates the background for us to realize that there's not only a huge set of environmental impacts, but there's also underlying social and political causes, which is highlighted by the fact that there's 1 billion people threatened by food insecurity, 1 billion people practicing open defecation, 2.8 billion people in the world surviving on less than $2 a day, and massive amounts of more direct human environment conflict. For example, just in India, there are 1.6 million conservation refugees, 1 million snake bites, 20 million dog bites, and so on. So I want to pause over there and say that these problems started becoming evident about 100 years ago. And people started becoming more cognizant of human nature relationships and questioning the extractive sort of approach that the Western post-industrial civilization had created, right? Really a narrative of man dominating nature and being able to bend nature to his or her will. starting with the ideas of people like Henry Thoreau in the, in the US, followed by naturalist, naturalists and people that worked with the state on land use, people such as Aldo Leopold, Gifford Pinchot, who set up the American National Park System. The idea deriving from people like Thoreau's sort of poetic vision of the world was conservation as a pristine wilderness. Now, this idea that man, as Professor Varshney said, man, he said man is a part of nature, but really this idea of man as apart from nature derived from these late 19th century, early 20th century ideas that conservation, that man and nature were apart, nature needed to be pristine, and conservation was about the idea of creating these pristine wildernesses. Now, I should point out that one of the later social scientists of the latter half of the 20th century pointed out that these early national parks that, like Yellowstone and so on, that they set aside as being pristine wildernesses, turned out that they looked the way they did because Native Americans had managed them in a particular way, using fire and grazing and so on. That actually this was the product of human intervention. So it was a little ironic that these human-created landscapes became the poster child for pristine wilderness. In fact, it's such a religious pursuit for conservationists over the last 100 years that in an essay dedicated to Ram Guha that a couple of us wrote, we have termed this idea Christianity. Now, by the mid 20th century, these ideas had started to take root in a stronger fashion, largely in the West, leading to the birth of the Global Conservation Organization. The WWF, the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, later on Wildlife Conservation Society, and so on. And the really interesting thing was that they imbibed to the core this idea of pristine wilderness, or Christianity as I called it. And in fact, TNC was set up as an organization that bought land to set it aside for conservation, which of course changed over the next few decades. By the late 20th century, conservation biology had been established as this crisis discipline. So by the 1970s, 1980s, people like David Ehrenfeld, Michael Sule had written textbooks about conservation biology. The journal Conservation Biology and Biological Conservation had been started. So this idea, not just that as a crisis, conservation biology needed to be practiced with utmost sort of like urgency, but also biology as being central to the idea of conservation. So we need conservation was a global cause that everybody needed to be committed to, but this would be led by biologists. By the 21st century, and I will come back to some of this, the idea that conservation, but biology may not be really central to conservation had started to take root. A lot of social scientists under the broad field of what was defined as political ecology started to criticize some of this. So Daniel Brockington in his book, Fortress Conservation, really sort of brought down this idea of this pristine wilderness and the effect it was having on communities in Africa where he worked. Several others started criticizing, biology as being central to conservation because, after all, I mean, the truth is, the argument is if you leave nature to itself, it will do what it does, right? The crisis recognized in the 20th century was a crisis created by humans. So you really need to understand humans and influence human change. And therefore, various social science fields from political science to economics to social, sociology, anthropology really had as large, if not actually a much, much larger role to play in conservation and sustainability. Leading to both conservation being seen as a common cause and in a way to the field being more broadly known as conservation science than conservation biology. So Gary Larson's 1990s satirical take on this idea of pristine conservation and wildlife preserves. But as I mentioned, during this time, these big international NGOs had also sort of established themselves as these multinational corporations. It was very clear that conservation of cuddly animals such as pandas, and well, tigers aren't necessarily cuddly, but certainly most posters would have like a tiger cub or a leopard cub on it. There's classic WWF posters that WWF India had created, which I as a teenager had in my room, this huge leopard cub and tiger cub. So definitely cuddly animals equated to money. But as I mentioned, by the 1990s, people had started to recognize that conservation was having this really strong negative impact on people. So Ram Guha had written these classical essays called The Authoritarian Biologist and the Arrogance of Anti-Humanism. Mac Chapin wrote an essay in 2003 called A Challenge to Conservationists. Mark Dowie wrote this, again, seminal essay called Conservation Refugees, all calling out the effect of conservation on people. On the other hand, the sort of very corporate nature of these large NGOs was being highlighted. There's a book called Green Ink by a former Conservation International employee, where she calls to account their actions, talks about the $1 million annual dinners and so on. But at the same time, these large organizations also started incorporating the idea of development in their work. But many people also criticized that, saying that this was mainly because there was money in that sector as well. And if you look at the maps of some of these work, it kind of looks like those, 17th, 18th century maps of where, the Dutch colonies and the Portuguese and the Spanish colonies and the French colonies, where, the European colonial powers had sort of divided up the world. So you look at CI and WCS and Nature Conservancy, pretty much looks like these guys have carved up different parts of the world. So it's a form of conservation colonialism that many people have critiqued. But at the same time, the other kind of colonization that was taking place was conservation by conservation biologists. As I said, David Ehrenfeld, the founder of conservation biology, said biology is at the heart of all phases of conservation, leading to what was called parachute science, which is people going to different parts of the world, and gathering data over there or gathering samples in the name of conservation. But also using this knowledge to promote a particular idea of conservation, that humans are not a part of nature. Many early conservation biologists make this statement when they start. Science amongst the big international NGOs was establishing these biodiversity hotspots. More recently, ideas such as half Earth and nature needs half, which I'll come back to a little later. But the important thing to note over there is that while the proponents of half Earth claimed that it was based on ecology, other proponents that suggested that humans and nature could coexist in reconciliation ecosystems was also based on ecology. But also ultimately what you believed was not based on science, but really what your belief system was. Needless to say, all of this was also sort of exacerbated by assessments of endangerment, which, while it has its own value, also had deep inherent biases set into it. Now, I won't go too much into this, but I do want to point out that some of this stems from these very broadly different ways of viewing nature, from biocentric views, which believe that nature or animals have an inherent right to exist, from anthropocentric, which is strongly based on humans' relationship to nature and the services and utilization that nature provides. Philosopher Brian Norton came up with the idea of weak anthropocentrism, which incorporated the idea of cultural value of nature, which, as Professor Varshney pointed out, is embedded in the Millennium Ecosystem Services. Now, all of this leads to, Bill Watterson's character Calvin's view that, sometimes I think the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe is that none of it has tried to contact us. And I will tell you why. Now, I bring these up as 5 broad myths about conservation because I think today conservation, as perceived largely by the public, still has these, by the public and political power, still have these views. One is that environment and development are inherently contradictory. You will hear in arguments about development today in India, development around the world, that the environmentalists are against development, the Greens, as the political parties are known, are against development, and so on. Now, and many of these, if you Google environment and development, you will see a whole range of cartoons like this, which essentially point to the fact that the wider view of the world is that they're contradictory. But the question that I want to ask here is, are they contradictory at all? And I don't need to dwell on this because again, Professor Bhargava and Professor Varshney both pointed out that it is not environment and development that are contradictory, but a particular form of development, a particular paradigm of development, a particular vision of development that has been promoted by corporate leaders, by industry, by in the West, the industrial military complex, by the political powers that be, and even to a great extent, though perhaps not entirely, by capitalism and markets, right? But certainly that has played a significant role as well. The question we have to ask is who's gaining from this development? And there I think we go back to the questions of social equity. And if we ask the question of can we provide development to those who need it most, I think we will find that those questions of environment and development are not as contradictory as it is made out to be. Needless to say, conservationists have played a strong role in promoting this wrong idea by kind of taking very extreme positions, which might have negative consequences for people, saying, relocate people from parks and do this and do that, which of course then antagonizes people and gives the impression that environment and development are contradictory, and this is a myth that we need to get rid of. The second is that overpopulation is the biggest problem, which is something that an idea that Paul Ehrlich started sort of like promoting in the 1960s. And in a way, this really kind of consciously or unconsciously put the weight and the onus of solving environmental problems on the developing countries, on the global south, and so on. Is population a problem? Yes, it's a problem. But if you look at the use of resources, really, as I said, less than 5% of the world's population uses an inordinate amount of its resources. So it's not the population per se, but it's the distribution of resources and what we consider as the norm. What is it that people aspire to, right? We talked about the idea of minimalism. Professor Bhargava said, long live minimalism, in a sense that for us to be equitably to use resources and to to frame what those will be used for, I think is the problem, and not population itself. The framing of overpopulation of the problem puts the blame on developing countries, on the South, on uneducated populations, and so on, right? And puts the onus on them in a rather unfair fashion. The third, which we've talked about extensively, is that nature and humans are separate. Now, though this idea, I would say, has been not phased out, but a stronger view of nature and humans being connected ecosystems has come to pass in the last 20 years. As great an ecologist as E.O. Wilson started promoting the idea of half Earth. And this idea of half Earth is based on the idea that you need to set aside half of Earth for nature for it to sustain the other half of Earth. Now, for those of you who watch movies, especially recent sort of popular Western movies, this sounds very similar to the idea of the chief villain of the Avengers series, Thanos, where he wanted to destroy half of the universe in order to create a more sustainable universe. Now, some of us have somewhat in jest argued that Thanos's sort of algorithm was more fair and equitable because he was using some kind of random algorithm where some random half of the universe died, whereas in Wilson's perspective, today, if you actually try to set aside half of Earth, it will be in the poorest parts of the Earth. The most marginalized people will get affected, and it will increase inequity and will have very unjust consequences. Needless to say, if you disconnect humans from nature, then how are you creating the future connectedness in order for people to want to protect that and value those? Value nature itself. Another view that's very popular in conservation is that consumptive use is bad, and that a lot of campaigns around the world in conservation have focused on overexploitation of resources, on poaching, on the decline of these sort of very charismatic animals, and so on. However, I mean, I can for example give an example from my own work on sea turtles. The 60s and 70s and 80s, much of the emphasis was on how these populations were crashing. But once some degree of protection was provided, these populations have exploded. There are millions of olive ridley turtles around the world, hundreds of thousands of green turtles, elephant populations have exploded, tiger populations have exploded. actually animals have a great capacity to bounce back from hits to their population. What they can't bounce back from is from hits to the habitat, which we've done a much, much worse job of doing. So actually in areas where consumptive use by communities has been allowed, actually populations have flourished because there is ownership. And we have to remember that hunting and use of wildlife and nature is as old as humanity itself. There are theories that link protein, wild meat consumption and protein to the development of the human brain. Many authors have also pointed out that today's problems of population and widespread industrialization actually go back to the spread of agriculture. So if you want to blame something, we can actually blame settled agriculture for the post-industrial state that we're in. But I don't want to sort of like dissuade people from from eating vegetarian food. My point simply is that consumptive use is also deeply embedded, and while certain forms of meat production are extremely environmentally unfriendly, I think to sort of brush the entire culture of hunting or use with that target with the same brush is unproductive and detrimental to the larger sort of issue of conservation. Professor Varshney, I'm sorry to have to disagree with you, but the idea of vegetarianism being environmentally friendly is a bit, I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I'm going to say it's a bit misleading, because many people believe that if I'm vegetarian or vegan, I've basically done enough to save the environment. Of course, there's some very nice cartoons about it, but the issue is that taking that into account and not considering anything else is actually brushing under the carpet many issues. So if you take agriculture itself, rice has been shown to be one of the most water intensive, and more recently papers show that it is one of the largest sources of methane production, and therefore it's actually a very environmentally unfriendly practice. It's also grown in parts of India where it shouldn't be grown. So I think we brush aside some of the key issues when we kind of like take this very broad motherhood statement kind of approach to this. One of the greatest per sort of like unit users of water is actually chocolate. Fortunately, we don't perhaps consume chocolate in those great quantities. But the other is the idea of flying food around the world, right? Washington Sundar is okay because Washington Sundar is local, but Washington apples are not. And Washington apples really are symbolic, which you'll find in every supermarket in India, is symbolic of the fact that we take our vegetarian food, and actually meat as well, and fly it all around the world, which of course links back to this problem that we started with of global connectivity. So the broad ideas that certainly we need to stop these very unsustainable forms of meat production, such as grass-fed beef and so on. But there are many unsustainable forms of food production, all of which we would need to address if we need to reduce our impacts on land, on water, on greenhouse gas production, and so on. And the other problem with sort of these very sort of broad views of food are that it also demonizes certain people. So people is used to demonize, tribal communities or other communities that might consume certain food items that people in power feel are wrong. And this creates social injustices and social issues, which again sort of contribute to this larger sort of challenge that we're all facing. So let me wrap that up with what I think we should do. I think, this humans being a part of nature is so critical. We need to connect with nature. Now, when I say I love turtles, people think, oh yeah, this guy works on turtles. He loves to work on turtles. He loves to see turtles. We have these Aribadas in Orissa where there are hundreds of thousands of turtles nesting. Who can't love it? But when I say love, I love fish, or somebody else says I love fish, you may think, oh, because they taste good, they have an amazing diversity, they are beautiful, you like to scuba dive and watch them, or you're an ecologist and you want to support coral reefs, or you're a sociologist and they sustain coastal populations, or you're from ICMR and you think fish have medically important compounds, or you're just a researcher, they're great research. Any of this could apply to fish. It's all about values. But the same can apply to turtles, the same can apply to elephants, the same can apply to beetles or plants, right? We need to recognize, internalize, and accept and tolerate the cultural diversity about nature that is there globally already. And we need to become accepting of each other in that. Secondly, this business of I want to have better environmental impacts cannot be reduced to, the very typical in the West to say, I'm a vegan, I support the environment. But you may be buying furniture, taking flights, doing 100 other things that have massive environmental impacts, right? We need to recognize the larger indirect plus direct impacts that we have on the environment, be it coastal marine ecosystems, forests, mountains, and so on. What are the overall carbon impacts that we're having on the world, and how can we reduce that? Finally, I think it's really important to connect the dots. I think we cannot use any of these issues in isolation. There is environmental issues, but it's linked to livelihoods, health, political economy, government, governance, human rights, which are, education and so on, and larger scale sort of international and national level issues that influence these processes. Now, if you're unable to connect the dots, we're actually not going to solve one or the other of these problems by itself. And therefore, it is such a delight for me to be talking at this, to an ICMR-related institution about linking environment and health, because that is one of the key kind of the challenges for us in the upcoming years and decades, is how do we connect these dots and make progress across all fronts. We do this, I think, by finding the balance. And that balance is both ecological and economic, but it's also cultural, political, and historical. We need to connect science to human endeavors. I think Professor Varshney mentioned the idea of poetry. Nature, environment, a connectedness to it needs to become part of our art, part of our music, part of our narratives. And I think only when it's like truly embedded, and separating humans and nature, giving half of Earth for nature doesn't solve that problem. We need to internalize what we want as a community, as a nation, as an international community, for ourselves, both socially and culturally, and the environmental future that we want for our planet. As a very, very broad framework, we use this framework of global and combining global and regional and local stressors, and looking at these human natural coupled ecosystems, examining both ecological processes and social processes, and having both top-down as well as bottom-up processes being equally important, top-down being policy, things that governments and international communities do, but bottom-up also having ownership and engagement from local communities at every level. And only this, we believe, can lead to the kind of resource management and conservation planning that leads to that conservation and sustainability that we would all like to see. Yes, and with that, I would like to end. Thank you very much. And thanks again so much for inviting me to give this talk.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a really interesting talk. I'm sure all our audience members have benefited by listening to you. Moving on to the next part, as we all know that all good things have to come to an end, we are almost at the end of today's program. But before we start officially winding up, I would like to inform our esteemed guests and all our audience who have logged in today about the enthusiasm and interest shown by students all over India in participating in the essay competition organized by our institution, ICMR NIRE, for the occasion of World Environment Day. Please go to the next slide. We have received almost more than 300 entries from students hailing from different parts of India, even far off corners like Jammu Kashmir, Arunachal Pradesh, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It was a tremendous task to select our winners from such a competitive pool. The winner of this competition is S. Sri Parvati who is currently enrolled in, next slide please, in MSc Biochemistry at SB College, Changanassery, Kerala, and she has won a cash prize of rupees 7,000. Our first runner-up is Ms. Ravina Ravindra Singh Mungane, who is currently pursuing BSc Agriculture from Punjab Rao Deshmukh Krishi Vidyapeeth, Akola, Maharashtra, and she has won a cash prize of rupees 4,000. Congratulations to both our winners. Next slide, please. As India's environmental challenges and their impacts on health continue to grow, there is a need for strategic and rigorous research and interventions that highlight and address the perspectives and experiences of communities directly impacted by environmental exposures and disasters. As highlighted by Director Sir and DG Sir, NIRE and ICMR believe in community engagement. However, in recent years, there is an increasing interest among the researchers to use community-based participatory research, but the corresponding capacities to engage community in various stages of research and knowledge production is still limited. Therefore, the PRIA International Academy and ICMR NIRE have agreed to pull together their respective academic resources to develop an online 6-week course on environmental health and community-based participatory research, which we plan to launch soon. I'm sure it will benefit many researchers, practitioners, and students who are interested to undertake community-based participatory research, especially in the field of environmental health. And the details will be launched soon in both PRIA and NIRE websites. We will be highly remiss in our duties as organizers of today's session if we fail to thank our esteemed guests and all our audience members who have patiently participated in the symposium. Hence, I would now like to request Dr. Vishal Diwan, Scientist E, to officially convey our gratitude.
Respected honorable guest, directors, scientists, and technical staff of ICMR and other institutes, students, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of ICMR NIRE, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all speakers. Thanks to Honorable Director General Sir Professor Bhargav, Professor C.K. Varshney, and Professor Karthik Shankar. Today, we had the opportunity to hear your thoughts on ecosystem restoration, challenges that we are facing, and way forward. We are sure that your thought-provoking talks will create much needed awareness about our environment, nature, and ecosystem restoration among scientists and general public. Thanks again to all the speakers for adorning the occasion and sharing their opinion today. Thanks to audience who took their time and today joined this virtual symposium. We are also grateful to all who has participated and submitted their essay on this occasion. I wish to express my gratitude to ICMR NCDIR, especially Director Dr. Prashant Mathur sir and Rosalind Madam for facilitating this video conference. I extend my thanks to Dr. Tiwari sir, Director NIRE, for his guidance and leadership in organizing this event. We are also grateful to jury that has read and assessed more than 300 essays and submitted the result just in time. It was Herculean task indeed. I also extend my sincere thanks to scientific, administrative, technical, and IT department of ICMR NIRE for their involvement, cooperation, and all-round support. Finally, thanks to Dr. Tanvi Trashna, Scientist B, for her all-round efforts in the preparation and later excellent moderation of this event. We are looking forward to meet you again all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for conveying the vote of thanks and expressing our gratitude to our guests and our audience members. I would now like to inform everyone connected that we have reached the end of today's program. I would like to conclude by reiterating the motto of Ecosystem Restoration campaign started by United Nations Environment Programme: Recreate, Reimagine, Restore. Thank you. Have a good day.